Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Brendan Hauser with EVOQ Bike. So I'm super excited to have Adam Mills from Source Endurance on the podcast today. We crossed paths chatting on Instagram, and some athletes that I've had on the podcast have been coached by Adam. So I figured I'd reach out to him with a ring of questions that have been popping up a lot from athletes. So I want to start to get other coaches' inputs on them because every coach has a little bit different way of going from A to B. So we're going to talk about everything from heart rate and power with endurance riding, also heart rate versus power or maybe other metrics for VO2Max training, increasing your FTP, some favorite sessions, signs of fatigue, signs of fitness, strength training, is it worth it, some soft skills, and a whole lot more. I really enjoyed this conversation with Adam. I hope you pull some things from this that will help you get faster. So with no delay, here is Adam Mills with a great conversation about cycling training. Thanks, Adam. Really appreciate you doing this. And then we just caught up on Instagram, and I was like, you are a great person to have on to answer some of these questions for people that are wondering what we're going to talk about. I think heart rate and power always comes up. Want to talk to Adam about like VO2Max training, increasing your FTP. This is a timely question. And then we just had a few others like strength training. Just really go on any tangents that you want. I just like talking to other coaches because I think as athletes, we're always looking for that magic bullet, and every coach has a different way of approaching it and finding ways to help their athletes win. And you clearly have done that many times over with some really highly successful athletes. So the first question I think is most important for maybe people that don't know you. Who's Adam Mills, and how did you get into cycling, and more specifically, how did you get into coaching?
So I got into cycling because both my buddy and I, we were like 10 years old living in Topeka, Kansas. We both wanted to play soccer in this league, and both of our parents were like, you can go, but the other parent has to take you because I can't because of work, right? So we kind of lied and said that each other's parents were taking us, and we just rode our bikes to soccer practice. Fine, except it was always dark on the way home. So we're like cruising home on these huffy 10 speeds, like no lights. you know, it was fine. It was always fine. That's how I got into it. And then I liked riding. I was better at riding a bike than I was at soccer, probably. And then just did this other thing called Bike Across Kansas, this week-long, like 400-mile bike tour. And then I liked going fast. Awesome. And, raced a bunch as a junior, raced through college, and then got on an elite team and started racing pro stuff. And in my probably about 32 years old, I realized I didn't like being nose down in the gutter, just hoping someone in front of me didn't make a mistake anymore.
Yeah.
So kind of like executed an exit strategy. Concurrently, though, I was in college, and it was an exercise science degree, like biology. I was to the point, I told my wife and my son this, we were at the Grand Canyon, but I hit that crossroads, like you have to declare a major. I either wanted to do like park ranger stuff or like exercise science, because I was really into like the Chicago Bulls and how they were always like crushing people. And on the basketball side, on the cycling side, it was like the beginning of the Armstrong era. I was really interested in that because I was like, how come these guys just can't race with him? Like, he's not good all year and then he's really good in the tour. That was before you know the truth, right? Like, why can no one keep up? There has to be a way to like make sure you're faster than you want to be. And so that was kind of the driver for that. Worked a couple years for Carmichael, and then started doing my own thing. And, here we are now.
Cool. Were you racing in like when did you stop doing like NRC stuff?
Probably 2013 was like my last NRC year. I raced from like 2002 to 2013.
So maybe we crossed paths. 2012, I was racing for a small team in upstate New York, but we had a couple guys. We were trying to get to NRC races. I'm trying to think. We did, it was Tuna and Tour Tuna. Who'd you race for then in 2012?
2012, I was on they were either Mercy Cycling or Think Finance. So
okay,
Mercy Cycling, the like Stephen Kate, Brad Huff, those guys came from.
I'd have to go
So
back and check like road results. Maybe we crossed paths at a race or something.
like Joe Martin stage race, I was almost always at. I was at that
Okay,
like
I didn't get out to that yet.
the
That's
the first 10 Tulsa Toughs.
okay. Yeah, see, I was still like, if it wasn't in I think the farthest I travel, I did everything northeast. I rarely went west, and I was still doing medical device sales. So anything that was multi-day was pretty much not happening for me at that point in time. Really not until like 2015 or 16. So probably we missed each other there. But um, well, let's get into some of these questions that they come up to me all the time. And if you have questions that maybe pop up on your radar that people are asking you, throw those in the mix here. But the number one question over and over and over again is for endurance riding, or we'll call it zone 2 on a 5-zone model for most people. Heart rate or power or both, or maybe something else. What's your kind of go-to, and how do you come to that?
So it really varies for the athlete. Like some of them really like to have that rigid prescription of like zone 2 is anything between like 200 and 250 or whatever, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
really like that because it gives them like Garmin, you can set alarms on it. Like you're under 200 watts alarms. Like, yeah, but I'm going down a mountain.
Yeah.
um, so they like that. Some of them, really like the heart rate, like keep the heart rate in this like broad range. Obviously heart rate has its own issues, and when you get into like higher intensities, it's really tough to dial that in because of the heart rate lag and reaction. The heart rate's a good one. If you have both, then you can track them together and then kind of like see when that deviation starts to happen, because a lot of riders also, they train too hard and they train too much, as
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure like
Hey, are you pointing fingers at somebody here, Adam?
well, the hardest part with a talented athlete is like pulling the reins just enough to where they're actually fresh when they need to be,
Yeah.
right? But I really have a few years ago, kind of with the advent of like WKO4, I really got into using intensity factor,
Mm.
because a lot of people, like if you live in the Midwest or where there's kind of steep hills, you want to keep some speed up the hills, but you don't want to crawl up them, and you don't, if you have to run from a dog, you have to run from the dog, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I've been using intensity factor pretty effectively, but then it comes with that education component too. You have to explain what it is, why it's important, why it's okay to like, surge up this 20-second hill to maintain enough speed.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you keep the intensity factor, like for zone 2, it's what, like 0.62 to 0.67 sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that lets the rider do as much as they want to, as long as they keep in those like guardrails sort of thing.
Cool. And yeah, I've encountered more experiences now with a lot more people riding gravel where it's like, hey, I'm in Arkansas and I'm going up this 11% climb on gravel. I'm like, well, I mean, unless you have a huge chain and a big cassette in the back, yeah, you might be going over endurance, but what are you going to do? Get off the bike and walk? So you either need to
Right.
get more gears, or the workout's not gonna be perfect, but you got to deal with what you got to deal with. What do
Well, and
you,
to what you just said, it's not perfect thought, like exercise and training is never perfect for the most part, and nothing in biology is, right?
mm,
It's always on a continuum. So as long as you're keeping within this zone 90 whatever percent of the time, like it's okay to bump outside of the lines a little bit, right?
mm-hmm.
So can't do it
Very
all.
true. How much do you focus on heart rate decoupling? And is that something that you look at every ride all the time, or is there something that makes you go and look at that? Curious your thoughts on that.
It's really good for like dosing the long intervals, like tempo, sweet spot, threshold, because then you can tell when an athlete, like, okay, we don't need to give them 80 minutes of tempo today because they're decoupling at 50 minutes.
Mm,
So it's better if they could do the 80 minutes, then what do they do the next day? They're blown, maybe.
mm-hmm.
So if it's better to do like 50 one day, 50 the next day, like right when they start to decouple, as opposed to 80 one day and then it takes 3 days to recover from it,
Mm.
right? it's another tool in the box though, right? So not everyone's gonna, adhere to that.
That's really good though, because I can send this clip to athletes that feel like they need to be throttled after every ride. And I'm trying to explain that that is not the goal of every session, to be feeling wasted and wrecked. And so to hear you say that is really important. What about, let's stay on the same trend. What about VO2 max training? Heart rate, power, both, something else?
Heart rate's usually tough. If you make a exercise prescription based on power, heart rate's usually harder because of the lag effect. It just takes longer for it to respond, at least for the first few intervals. Then it gets pretty fast. Power, so I like to use power for those, or it depends on what you're training. So like I work with a client who just did Mid-South and was kind of in the mix, and we found that he has like a limit to how much VO2 he can accomplish in a day. So we're going to try and work on the volume of that. So if you want to do that, you have to look at what's a repeatable, sustainable, in quotes, because VO2, so it's not, but what's a repeatable power he can do and how much. So then you're looking at power. But then if you wanted to like push the absolute level for VO2, like there's a power max power component to that. So then you're just like, give me three all out at three by 3 minutes as hard as you can go. And we'll look at how fast you degrade on that. But ideally they should be really close to their best in the last like 90 days or 1 year for that stuff. But depends on what you want to work. And the higher you get, I love it because the closer you get to the 100% all-time maximum number, the less they can do, right?
The less reps, you mean?
Right.
Yeah.
They maybe go like 5 by 5 minutes at 95% of VO2 max. But if you want to do 3 by 5 minutes at like 99%, they may only be able to do 1, maybe 2.
It's crazy.
But you don't get 3 and 4 usually.
No, and because that's actually, and this is it. This will be a good question. Sometimes people are like, well, when do I get to go test my 5 minute? I'm like, well, right now, there's like the biggest thing in your races that you've told me is later in the race, when you're putting out this type of power, which is correlating to where your VO2 max is where you're falling off. So like we want to, similar to what you're saying, the volume, we want to be able to do more of these so that you get down the road and you have a number 4, a number 5. So let's work on that. And then let's go one day when you feel amazing, go crank out your best 5 minute ever. And I love to read it because I still do this myself. When I do it, I'm always like, damn, I'm rocked after that. Like the second one is much worse. So it's interesting how the small percentage makes such a difference. Yeah. How do you tell an athlete, or how do you incorporate, like, do you do maximal days every once in a while, or when do they go for a PR, or is it like, hey, you're feeling good, just go rip it? Like, is there a way that you like prescribe that type of thing, or maybe not at all?
I like to look at, like, whenever you feel good, really good one day, I would tell someone like, go for it. Just tell me you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because like you said, if you try 2 of those, it leaves a mark. Like you're not doing anything great for the next hour or so.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we look at it. I use some like WKO5 charts, like the one that says you're about due for another effort of this, to try and test that stuff. But also if they race enough, you tend to get good, because there's a motivation component to those maximal efforts. And if they race enough, you get a fairly consistent, like, best 5 minute at the time. I've been trying to figure out how to get like, how WKO5 gives you like a modeled FTP number every day, and then it gives you the same with like FRC. I'm trying to figure out how to give me that for like a VO2 power.
What
about, not good at coding.
Have you used the what do they call it? Is it the absolute VO2 in that performance tab?
It might be. Yeah, my attempts have been kind of half-hearted.
Yeah,
there I don't know enough about the coding to figure out how to do that. But.
Yeah, it's definitely nothing that I created. It's something that was in there. I I don't use too many of the pre-made tabs, but I remember seeing this one. I'm going to screenshot and send it to you later and see if that's something you've been
Yeah, if
looking
you
for.
find it, send it to me because that'll change every day, just like the other things will. And it seems silly that there's that chart where they all track daily, but there's not a like VO2 number on it.
Yeah, and I've even, I guess along those lines, it's interesting. Like I was using optimized intervals for a while, and then I kind of got away from it because I felt like it was not specific enough to what the athletes actually needed. But it's been interesting to look back on certain athletes, and they've been pretty applicable as we've been getting closer to race season. And I went out and I tried some of what it said I should do. And like it was in a good ballpark. It was a good workout. It's been interesting. I've always been a power guy. My last coach, Tom Bell, was more of a heart rate guy for VO2 stuff. So it's just so funny, like who influences you on which way and how to mix them all together. And so, yeah, it's been good to shake it up a little bit, but.
And even VO2 has that huge like psychological and emotional component to it also.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a friend who was racing for rally and his coach was giving him like all the VO2 in the world. And he told me one day he just did them, and then he texted his coach and was like, I'm so glad I finished my last VO2 workout of the year. Coach was like, it's only April. Like, you have a bunch now. He's like, no, I'm not doing those again until next year.
Wow. What?
Like,
So explain that for someone that might not know what you mean by this relationship or this, like the mental emotional side of VO2, because I don't think also like some newer cyclists have no idea what going hard enough in training like this is. So
right.
tell like what is that relationship or what is that vibe that the VO2 workouts give, and for yourself or for these freaking national champions that you're coaching, like a text like that your friend would send?
So for starters, most riders, we find when they come to seek our coaching expertise is they ride too hard on easy days, and then they can't ride hard enough on hard days to truly get that benefit, right? And a VO2 effort, if you think about like what's the biggest hill, not a mountain, but the biggest hill, so 3 to 8 minutes long. Mm-hmm. Now, if I would tell you what's your PR, look on Strava, say it's 8 minutes, so I would say, so that's what, 8 times 480 seconds. If I were to say you need to go ride that in 430 seconds or higher, 440 seconds or better, 6 times, like you're going to be at almost the absolute best you can do. And when you get into that, like the closer every incremental step you get closer to your absolute best, it's exponentially more energy, more difficult, more like muscle damage, more like emotional investment to make that happen, because it takes a lot of motivation to ride as hard as you can go. And that's one of the biggest kind of wear and tear items, is just emotionally they're really hard. Mm-hmm. I think one of your things, you said you had a hard time getting clients to do more than 2 VO2 workouts a week. And that's 100% true. It's because they're just so taxing in so many ways, right?
Mm-hmm. Big time. Have been trying to uncover, there's an athlete that I have that is strong, and his results do not match how strong I know he is. And there's definitely a mental piece to this. And there's we could go down a whole rabbit hole of positioning and tactics and whatever, but he made a comment to me of that. I had said, hey man, it sounds like you're negative self-talking before this race even started, and you don't believe in yourself at all. And he had said, well, I realize it doesn't come down to like motivation and what I think, it's the watts that I can put out. I 100% disagree with you. Like this is sports psychology 101. Like I'm glad we're having this conversation. Like we need to rewind big time. And so same thing in training. It's when athletes look at the training calendar and the comment is, just wasn't feeling today, I tried, and it's a super hard workout. I'm like, why don't we just tell me that day, hey, I'm in an argument with my spouse, I had a really bad day at work, like let's move it. Let's go ride endurance, go just have fun on the bike, get all that bad negative stuff out. You need to be so motivated for those really hard sessions. And to what you said, it's like people half-ass the really hard stuff, and then it's endurance day and they're riding tempo sweet spot, and it's like, okay, we're not doing the right things. This is all in the middle now. So this is good.
That's why true polarized training is so hard. It's not the hard part, it's the easy part that gets they want to ride hard. They're like, oh, it's polarized training, I have to ride hard now. It's like, no, you ride a lot of really, really easy and polarized training.
I'm definitely guilty of that. As that was the biggest thing that Tom being in Europe and one of our other coaches that used to work with us in Europe was, we laugh between the European coaching and the American style of like my endurance was just a little bit too hard all the time. I'm still trying to like reel that back to see the benefits. And it's interesting. There's guys, Corey Lockwood is a big one that we have a Discord. And so people post different screenshots and stuff. He's like mega volume, really easy, like 55% FTP, 50% FTP. So I think what a lot of American athletes think of as base training is going to become training in maybe 5 years when this more flushes itself out. But shifting down a zone to lactate threshold, FTP, whatever people want to call that. What's your way? And this is definitely going to be kind of athlete specific and to some of the points you've made before, but let's address this maybe for newer athletes that are listening to the podcast. Hey, I want to increase my FTP. What are things that you go about doing? Are you more constant power? Are you more over unders? Is there something different? How do you sort of look at that? And I realize it's kind of a huge can of worms, but let's throw something out there.
So it's a little bit of everything, because the problem with like improving FTP is that it gets boring. It takes a lot of volume in that power zone and a lot of volume in general to move that needle. Mm-hmm. And a lot of athletes can't tolerate it. If you have a choice between like go and ride for 3 hours in zone 2 today to like provide that base for an FTP bump, they're like, oh, I can do that. I'm gonna do that in a group ride. Like, no, that's not like so close. Like group rides are great. They're fun, social, they're hard, they're not zone 2. There are a lot of things in zone 2, isn't it? Which is fine. But like let's call a spade on it, right?
Yeah.
It's just hard to get that discipline. Or they'll go like, I'm gonna go in the mountains and ride zone 2. And then it's like, well, you're riding threshold up every mountain. Mm-hmm. You're getting zone 2 because you're coasting the backside for 20 minutes. So
average power is not, the whole session average power is not your average power for the whole session.
Right. But we do a lot of like volume at like near threshold stuff. So sweet spot is a really good way to bump FTP numbers, because FTP is hard. It's like lactate of 4-ish, right? Mm-hmm. Not sustainable for most people. I try and push that like time to exhaustion, the TTE number. If I can get an athlete where they have 50, 60 minutes of that, they're usually really fit.
So for someone listening, if they know their TTE, ride that amount in sweet spot. And what do you define sweet spot as?
It's like 88 to 93% of threshold.
Okay.
But of FTP, but FTP is that now you get into this like you're not splitting hairs, you're getting really into the weeds about what's FTP, right?
Right.
So, and it depends on how you want to define it, but we'll use the Training Peaks number. But I think a Training Peaks methodology is just a little bit too aggressive for a lot of riders to be able to accumulate a ton of the time.
Mm-hmm. And would they, let's say they had a TT of 50 minutes, would they do maybe 3x15 with the goal of getting to 50 minutes? Or would you split it in half? Or is it like probably rider, just what you can tolerate maybe the first time? Or how would you set that like starting off point?
I would work to it to try and get them to prove the TTE, but at some point I'm going to want them to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like it says 50, let's see it.
Yeah.
Like, but how does that work? It's like, well, you've done it before because it's not there for magic.
Yeah.
Like, so let's see it. I mean, I'm in San Diego, so we always have Fiesta Island in the area, so you can just go down there and just do laps on Fiesta Island and like, look at the people like sun tanning and smoking pot at the same time.
Don't catch the contact high.
Yeah. Well, I've been out there before where it's like so many people smoking pot, you almost can, but.
Oh, that's funny.
Or if they have a velodrome handy, you can go prove it there, or just on a long climb, whatever you want to do.
But. Yeah. I think that's a really good, what you had said to kind of jump it off of. There's a mix of everything, because I had come up with, I was a fast cat athlete for a while and we were more steady state. And then kind of through coaching with a friend and coaching myself for a little bit, when WKO4, trying to think when this was, I just moved to Tennessee. We were more following like TTE prescriptions and doing longer stuff and more sweet spot. And then I was working with Tom, who doesn't really do as many long intervals, and he's really into over-unders. And so going through each one, there was a positive of each one, but then there was like a drawback. And I think the things when I was doing constant power, I wasn't so good at surging above threshold. And it was like that was becoming a cap. But then even my comment to Tom was I would go do a ton of over-unders. And then I don't know if it was a mental thing. I don't know if it's a muscular thing. I would be waiting for that under. And I would be like, this is hard. I want my like recovery minute. And I like go, but then riding above threshold felt great. But if I was trying to pin it, and so it more became, hey, we got to mix these together. And I think that's a huge thing of like, whether it's just the benefits of variation. I don't mean like just go do a whole bunch of everything, but like a focused variation within the zone, within the, like, what are we trying to accomplish in each different type of training? So that's interesting.
And to that end too, like what's the goal of the athlete? Like if your athlete is Seattle to Portland or an unbound gravel, 200 miles, takes all day, do they need to be able to do the short-term surges? Mm-hmm. Or are they just looking to go as fast as they can for 12 or 14 or 16 hours or whatever? So you don't necessarily need to do it, but if the athlete is, race driven, criteriums, track stuff maybe, or like road races, yeah, like you have to make the splits, and the splits happen in the US, like 5 minutes or less is a split, is for how the splits work. So you have to be able to go really hard for 5 minutes intermixed with that, threshold output. Otherwise you're going to miss the splits, and then you're just, then you have to make up an excuse of why you missed it.
That was boxed in.
You ever follow the vegan cyclist?
I don't follow him so much.
We had a wheel. He called it the wheel of excuses, and he spun it. And I was like, man, I wish I would have had that when I was 20. I wish my team captains would have had that when I was like 19, 20, because I had a lot of excuses for a couple of years. You get called out and you have good mentorship that like helps you work through it, but you just pull it out and spin the wheels like, this is my excuse today.
That's awesome. I like that. I was actually, that's gonna be a future podcast. So I'm gonna bring out the Adam Mills referencing that. What is, from coaching a bunch of different athletes in a lot of different disciplines, are there any sessions that just seem to resonate really well with different types of athletes? Like that people find not only enjoyable, but you feel like there's something beneficial to them?
It's a training session, but it's so unstructured. Like if you've had a good block of a lot of structure and the athlete's like on the limit, I will literally put on their schedule, like, go ride your bike today. Like, I don't care how far, I don't care how fast. Even if you just get on it and ride to the mailbox and back, that's going to count.
Cool.
Just go ride your bike today.
Yeah.
If they have a ride, like I got a couple of clients that did Mid-South gravel, and the day after I put go to brunch. That's your workout today, is go to brunch. I think those kind of things are needed. As far as like training sessions that really work, man, I find a lot of the younger athletes really love like 30-30s.
Yes.
We'll do those for days.
It's amazing. I think that's one thing, the lesson that I've learned of just coaching. I've always tried to check my personal biases, because I don't like those. I actually hate those, and I rarely do them because for me, I just don't feel great after doing them. But people love them. They're like, that was so fun. I'm like, you're crazy. Okay, well, we'll do these again, because what do you look for are you looking then again just power? And There are some people that will say for like, if they talk about them as Tabatas, they'll say go max and the power will degrade, but just give your RPE max for each one. Or do you more say go like 120% FTP the whole time? Or is it, how do you prescribe it? And what do you look for to see that they completed it properly?
So really, this is where like it takes a long time if I have like a high level client that's really trying to dial those in, but I'll go find a criterion and like try and grab a section that I know the race was hard, like maybe their 10 or 12-minute max or something. And I'll like, zoom it in and try and look at like, what does that look like? Because a lot of times it looks really similar to 30-30, right? And try and see like what power are they peaking at and then what are they resting at and kind of how is that, like how does that power output look? And try and use that as a basis and then, tweak it from there. It takes a lot of work to do that. So it's definitely labor intense. The other one is I definitely look at power because I want an athlete to be able to do not just the 30-second one, but also look at like what's the maximum like workload you can accumulate from the beginning of the first one to the end of the last one in a set. In that respect, you're looking at both, and they're never easy, right? And I have a couple of versions that I'll do for people. I do like the 30-30s, but if you're training a criterion writer, we'll also come back and do like 7-23s. So the 7-second efforts are like for an elite level athlete, like 800, 900 watts. But you get 20 seconds in between.
Say that again. So 720, do you say 723s?
Keep it on the 30-second intervals. So instead of 30 on, 30 off, it'll be like 7 on and 23 off to make a 30-second.
Oh, got it. Okay.
But the 7's so hard, you need 23s like instant. You're instantly going again, is what it feels like. But I want that accumulation of like, like the P max, like the super hard stuff. Because
that sounds really hard.
Looking at like criterions, there's a lot of accelerating out of corners that has to happen. It gets real old.
Yeah, it is aggressive over and over and over again.
Especially as a master's writer. Oh, the last 1-2 crit I did, I'm looking up ahead. I'm like, man, those guys have so much energy.
Oh, it's funny.
That's so much energy up there.
Too much energy.
I'm like, I remember when I could do that. I don't know how I did it. It's a lot of energy up there. Super excited.
It's funny you said. Sometimes I was just thinking about some on the opposite end of the spectrum when I was doing this longer TTE stuff, and I was living in Memphis, and so it was, relatively, it's not pancake flat, but it's like rolly flat, and you get out to these more of like a wooded Shelby forest. And I remember I was doing some like 90 to 120 minute just bangers, like get out to when there was being no cars and just rip. And I look back, I'm like, God, how the hell was I doing that? Like, granted, I think I trained it a lot, so I got better at it. And it's just I'm doing different stuff. But then I'm like, man, I was like full of energy 10 years ago to even want to go do that. What the hell's going on? And then that makes me sad. And I really start to wonder if I'm getting old. But it's
also really fun to like just rip down a road with an average speed of like 28 miles an hour.
It's crazy. I don't miss the riding there, but if I could isolate that section, there are some really good roads. And one of my friends, Jack White, lives out there now. So I vicariously follow his Strava, and I'm just like, those are some good times. It's different now, but yeah, those are good. What are the biggest signs of fatigue? And on the opposite side, fitness, maybe. This should have been two different questions. I'm bad at asking two questions at once. So let's do it first. What's the first sign of fatigue? Like, maybe not red flags, but like, this person's getting tired. How do you see that, since you're looking at power files and hear and seeing comments or emails or whatever?
The comments are super revealing. So the comments are more revealing than like heart rate variability. So if you read a lot about like overtraining, to get truly overtrained, you really have to like work at it. A lot of athletes aren't ever overtrained. You're just overreached and they're burned out. But burnout or just mental like motivation is a really good early indicator of fatigue. Athletes just like not into it that day, right? it's an interesting like kind of line to balance on, or tie wire, or whatever silly analogy you can think of. But so if it's like one day, sometimes you're like, depending on the athlete too and what they want to do, you can kind of nudge them and get them to push through it. But also I know that if they're that bad, if they're that day now for no reason, like no bad sleep, like no illness, whatever, they're probably on an overreached level. Even though like WKO5 may not tell you they're overreached, but for whatever reason they might be. And they might have like limited number of days left in this block. Mm-hmm. So even if you're like, well, you have 12 days left in this block, it's like, no, man, you might have 4 days left.
Yeah.
Like you just got to cut it short, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. So that's the early one. That's the first one. And if I can catch an athlete that early, we can always minimize the impact. Second is like, they'll just start they'll go dark.
That's just the no comments. It's just like they're gone.
And they don't upload files, or they don't do the workouts, right? Or they'll like miss calls, miss like, chat sessions, or they'll just not do this stuff. Mm-hmm. But, sometimes I always tell athletes, like, you ride enough, which all you do, you're consistent enough. If you have a day where you just aren't feeling it, just don't do the workout. If it's absolutely going to not be a non-starter, just don't do it. Just tell me. Because I get it. People are tired, but like heart rate, like response to efforts, if they're trying, and then you just notice like that's bad. That's definitely a red flag. If something's going on. And you may not see it for a couple of days, like 2 days later, it's like, oh, I'm sick today. So that makes sense, right? Just as a coach, just have to be not even in tune, but just aware and just willing to make changes. Because totally. I don't know how a lot of coaches operate, but I tell athletes, like, the only workouts that are set in stone are the ones you've done.
I like that. Dude, that's a good line, man.
Anytime you make a phone call and you need a change on your training workout, on your schedule, like, we'll do it. Because, say you have an athlete's like, oh, I can't do a 4-hour day today because I have a dentist appointment.
Like, yeah.
You know how hard it is to get a dentist appointment nowadays?
Yeah. It's when someone asks me, hey, do you mind if I change this? I have to work. I'm like, dude, what am I going to tell you? No? Like, yeah, we got to change it up. Your line is better. And I might steal that from you. I've always said, hey,
do it.
Training Peaks is not the Bible. Like, nothing here can't be changed. And, and I understand where people are coming from. I think back to my first coach, like what Jason told me was the written word. I was going to do everything that dude told me because I wanted to get better. And he was like, listen, man, I'm making really what he thinks are good, educated, not guesses, but calls. But I need you as the human being to realize you have a lot more going on than the algorithms tell me, than any software can tell me. Like, it's what you're talking and verbalizing to me is really important. And that was just a really good thing to pick up on from him. And shout out to Jason. He kept it real in a really good way. So,
right. Well, as a coach too, talking about like overreaching and what makes people tired and when they need to change it. Like, I always like to use the performance manager chart as a good analogy to like a mechanic's tool set. I mean, the performance manager charts was made in like 1999 or something. So it's 24 years old. Like, what electrical appliance in your house do you have is 24 years? How old is your car? Like, if I have a laptop that's more than 4 years old, I have to buy a new one because it doesn't run fast enough anymore, right? Yeah. So like, let's think about performance manager chart as like a great tool. And if you know how to use a tool, it's still a good tool, right? Like a good wrench is something that every mechanic needs in general. But if you don't know how to use that whole tool set, like, what good is it to have it? Right. So you still have to know how to use it, but they all have their limitations. And I think the performance manager chart is a great thing. It has its limitations, and that's why I love like the WKO5 now, because we can, whatever you want to dream up, you can make it. I would say always get more input from just yourself about what you need, because like Tim always asks, like, what are you trying to see and why? Right. Whenever someone asks, like, how do I make this? His first question is almost always, what are you trying to see and why?
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, just on a fishing expedition.
Right.
So I think using those advanced analytics are really, really good. Performance manager chart's still a great thing. It's a great tool. It's just a tool, just like anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at fatigue, or not fatigue, just being tired and fatigued, and whether or not to continue the training block to push through it or to cut it short. Like you said, it's all subjective. If the athlete's if they're already tired and they're going to have a stressful week at work, like you're done getting stuff accomplished.
Mm-hmm.
Time to move on, right?
Yeah. Onwards.
Right.
So an athlete's doing really well. Let's hit the other side. What signs of like fitness gains, and then they're, just crushing some workouts. When do you ever feel like you need to just pull things back so you don't push them too far so they don't hit that overreaching state? And is there anything that you would look for? I think this again, like many of these questions is so dependent. I think if it's like, well, I won't say what I think. What do you think about that?
I get a lot of athletes that they always want to do more. That's the first
Mm-hmm.
sign of when they're really on riding well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting more fit, or maybe their numbers need to be readjusted. Like what
Mm-hmm.
the roll off period for those things is 90 days in the analytic tools. But I'm not saying you can't make improvements faster. But you get athletes that are like, well, I felt good after 6, so I did 3 more.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're not. Then you see like, oh, well, heart rate decoupling never happens, so they're obviously doing better. But yeah, they just want to do more. They just seem super eager,
Mm.
really energetic. Or like you hear, oh, I was up early today and I did this and that, and it's like in the middle of a block, right? And they're up early doing stuff, and they're happy and bubbly at like 8 in the morning, which is about when my coffee starts to work. So it's like, okay.
Those are good. I like that. Those are good signs.
Right.
Strength training, yes or no?
So professional sport, the athletes are in the weight room at least 1 day a week. I don't understand why people would expect different for cycling.
Mm-hmm. Say that last part again and just cut out for a second.
At the end of the day, they're athletes.
Yeah.
And you can always benefit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even, what's the name? Jonas Vingegaard. Like, he'll benefit in a weight room. Some. If it's nothing else, it's if he falls down, he doesn't get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard of velocity-based training?
Is that? No, I don't think so.
It's not new, but it's becoming, through like technological advancement, it's becoming more widespread. So every professional sporting club that you've heard of that's on TV uses that to some degree. Like, it's in the Red Bull Center. It's like applying a power meter to weightlifting, right? So if you know the mass, you know how far you're moving it, and you know how fast you're moving it, you can calculate power.
Okay.
And all you need is cameras that are fancy. And we work with a company called Elite Form that has an app that'll let your iPhone do that now.
Oh, wow.
So the only other hardware you have to buy isn't these fancy cameras that go on top of your squat rack that are like $10,000 a piece or whatever. I don't know if that's true, that much. You can just set up your phone and do it, right? And it allows you to track like how fast you're moving the bar, and obviously like different weights or different mass and different velocities have different training impulses.
Mm-hmm.
And our athletes that have used it, like they accomplish their strength training goals, and they do it in like half the time, because if you can't move the bar fast enough, you're kind of like falling out of that range of where you want to do it, of what you want to accomplish, and so then you're just done.
Interesting.
Just like power meters, when they went from only on ergometers to like SRM was really what brought them into the world. And then SRM, along with that came this whole like education toolkit to educate coaches on using them. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere like in 2006 to 2010, everyone was buying power meters. Mm-hmm. I think we're due for something like that for strength training. That'll help not just cyclists, but every sport across the board.
Yeah, that'll be amazing. It's a huge can of worms. It's like, I agree with you that people should be lifting, but it's like dialing in the right program for every athlete. I reminds them like this is a sport in itself. So, I'm not a strength coach. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what I've tried that didn't work for me and a bunch of other people. Here's what has. Like we need to find a way to get in the middle. And I think was it Vanderpool's brother when he put out that training manifesto? Did you see that? The speed skater? This is the crazy training. But the thing that I will reference to people is that he was talking about strength training, saying, I'm doing the least amount possible for the biggest benefit. This is a secondary sport to my sport. I want to make some gains and move on and go ride and skate. And so I kind of look at it the same way, especially as we get closer to races. It's, just got to be careful in the weight room and do what you can do and then move on. So
you're not trying to get swole, bro.
Yeah.
You're trying to make it so that you're not like when you try and lift in the fall again and start up, you're not having to start from square zero.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting from square two instead of zero, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you're trying to I have athletes that travel a lot and they also run once a week regardless, usually on the lifting days, because if I have a client that gets a phone call and it's like, you're going to spend next week in Fort Lauderdale, Florida at a business doing business stuff, and you get the call on Sunday or Saturday afternoon and you leave on Sunday night, you're not taking a bike because you're in the middle of Fort Lauderdale and there's, probably limited places to ride and you don't know.
One road. There's one road. There's one road. That's where I am. There's literally one road.
Perfect. So, but you don't know because you have literally 12 hours to get your act together to get on the plane, right?
Yeah.
So you're not going to spend an hour of that packing your bike and another hour of it researching where to ride and programming stuff into your head unit. You're just going to take your running shoes.
Yeah.
And that's important because as a bike rider, I mean, we all have the cardiovascular ability to run a lot longer than we should.
Yeah.
And you'll take for days.
If not weeks. Yeah. Oh, right. Man, running, that is a different beast. What is looking more towards soft skills? What would you do for athletes that are into cross or a crit specialist that maybe isn't the best at cornering? Something that now will kind of shift away from power and heart rate, I would assume. How often would you have them focus on technique stuff? And would that be more from training races, or would you have them do specific training sessions on their own or with a couple friends to get better technique?
I like both of those ideas. We also did camps and clinics. We used to run cross clinics a couple a year, and I live in the Midwest, and those are always great because all those people learn a lot. Mm-hmm. Just one of my favorite exercises was setting up an S curve, just teaching exit speed, not entry speed. Mm-hmm. I loved it. It was so good to see everyone's skills improving that fast. Criterium camps and clinics, we've done those before. Those are great. Like you said, if you have a couple friends and you guys go work on, and you want to go work on stuff, going down a switchback mountainy thing is usually pretty good for cornering, pretty good practice. And because you're going downhill, you don't have to regain speed every time. It just comes. That's a good one to do. What was the other one? Like training races. I love training races. I love the weeknight race series in general because it gives you this low cost, not necessarily dollars because they seem to be getting more expensive, but it gives you this low cost, low risk, situation where you can try stuff in races that you would never try in an American Crit Cup race, but you can try stupid stuff. Can I bridge a 30-second gap today? I don't know. Let's try it. And if it doesn't work, you're dead in the water and you pay for it. Because like you said, the VO2 effort, you give one maximum effort and it hurts. But you wouldn't try it in an ACC race because the penalty for failure is super high.
Right.
You'll try that in a driveway race in Austin, right? Why not?
Let's highlight that for maybe the Cat 3, 4, 5 that doesn't know that is what that race is for. Check your ego that week, because I know plenty of athletes that have said, well, but I always beat this person. If I do that, I'll lose. And I'm like, this is when you should lose. Who cares if they win this practice race. Like, put yourself out there, roll the dice, learn something. And that's what you said, from putting on these clinics, how much people learned, figure out a way to learn something. I love that. Like, that is a great line that I'll definitely reuse to athletes of like, okay, how can we learn more about this specific topic that you're failing at? And the camps is a really good idea. And for an athlete maybe listening, you have the athletes that you look up to in your area or your region. If you message 10 of them and we're like, hey, you're amazing at X, Y, and Z. Me and this other group of people are trying to get better at it. Would you ever help us on the weekend? I guarantee you, unless they're a turd, 7 out of 10 are going to say yes. It's just going to be, hey, when can we find the right time? Let's meet for an afternoon. Let's go over this for an hour. And you're going to learn a ton from someone who's better than you. That's huge.
The California Bike Race series ran by Jeff Prinz out here. They have a beginner racer program. So the first race of the day, it's at like dark 30 in the morning, it feels like. They have like beginner racers. I think it's cat 4s and 5s. And they'll have experienced mentors come out and they'll ride in the race and watch. And then after the race is over, they'll break it down and have a chat. I think that's a really good idea. I wish it wasn't at like 6 in the morning because in LA, which is like a 2.5 hour drive for me. So for me to make that, I'm getting up at like whenever the bars close.
Yeah.
Like, you want to talk about like what makes it officially silly early in the morning is when you're waking up when the bars are closed.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. But also I've been writing this, like, and some of the coaches have been writing this criterion workout of the week on our website. And the one I put for this week is film study. So Tulsa Tough, I think, was the first race ever that had a legitimate live stream where you could replay. So you got done with your race over dinner, you could sit there and rewatch the whole thing and see like what was happening. What did you miss? What could you have done better? And I love this concept of race game film study. Every sport does it, right? And if you think about the teams in the World Tour, even that are the best lead out teams and the best finishers, bet your ass they're doing film study. Why wouldn't you? If you do film study, it'll help you win. You'd be silly not to. But cycling was kind of late to the game, or we're still traditionally against it because no one wants to go back and watch a race. But yet all of us would learn if we did.
100%. It's so much different watching it. So much different.
Bike racing is not hard. Like I ran the Elevate team for a year, like better part of 2 years, sitting in the car watching the races. And man, bike racing is not hard when you're sitting in a car at a heart rate of like 50. Watching people like send it, and you're like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
That one's not going to work. That one might, but I don't think so. And then you're like, that's it. And then it's it, right? You're like, oh, that's so easy to see that when you're sitting in the car or when you're watching on TV, you know it's going to happen, right?
And that's actually a really interesting point because it's like, I'll tell athletes when they upgrade, I said, don't worry, the race will slow down to like, someone's first 1, 2, 3 race. They're like, what just happened? I'm like, that's everybody went through that. Like you just weren't used to people are attacking all the time until something actually went. And like, yeah, so that's really, I've never thought about it that way. Yeah, it would just slow down the hardest races.
Right. Like go back and watch Strada Bianchi. Tell me you don't see it when Pidcock's going for it. You're like, it's over.
Yeah.
I mean, you got kind of touch and go later.
Yeah.
But like when he went, you're like, he's going to get a really big advantage from that. And I think it'll be enough if he can keep riding.
More film study, people. All right, we're coming up on an hour. I got a couple more for you. What excites you about the future of training and racing? Or, excuse me, of training and coaching?
Training and coaching. And there's a lot of rock star young riders in the US right now. And even if we can only like capture 25% of them and get like real careers out of them, I think the US is destined for like a lot of really good things in the sport. And being being part of that as like a coach is really cool. Being part of that as a fan is really cool. Being part of that as a, as a spectator watching on TV is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us not to be the set, I mean, we're probably below the like the second kid to the European racers, but yeah, to see the US more. I mean, I feel like I shouldn't speak because I'm not one of them, but I feel like seeing how riders respond now when they go over to Europe, that the US isn't just like the punk kids, like they do get some respect, but it would be amazing if there was just a much bigger handful and if we can become the NBA and just sort of take over. But we're probably far from that. But yeah, that is, there's a lot of kids from Rochester, New York, where I'm from, AJ August and God, I'm blanking on his name, the guy in Ineos, and just people, Magnus, and people crushing. It's really cool to see.
Think about like Quinn Simmons is fantastic. He's a great rider, super talented. I guarantee you, if you look at his history of development, there are kids in NICA that are significantly ahead of where he was when he was that young. I don't know any examples. I don't know anything about Quinn's like numbers or data or race history, but it's not like you get worse. Like athletes only get better to be at a high level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're probably going to see a pretty like healthy career out of Quinn Simmons too. So if we have riders that are better than that coming through the system, and we can get them to that point to where they're noticed by World Tour teams, like it's only going to be better for us. For
yeah.
So no offense, Quinn, like you're a World Tour guy. You're making it happen. You're a favorite to win at some level any race he enters. So that's an enviable position.
Totally. What is your number one tip for newer riders? Total open book.
It's probably the most important thing you can do is find a healthy environment with mentors that can help you learn how to ride, learn how to race, and most importantly, keep it fun. I think those are all going to go together. But
awesome.
It's too hard of a sport. It's too much work. It's too much effort. It's too much of everything to do it in a negative environment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I can't point anyone in any one place, but they're out there for sure.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And then I think to the keeping it fun, it's really hard. The last question would be stress reduction. What maybe have athletes used or that you've recommended that it's like training's hard. A lot of these people, if they're not a pro athlete, they're working a job, they have a family or what, no matter who's an endurance athlete, there's stress coming from somewhere. What are some good ways to reduce that?
I mean, it sounds like super nerdy and cliche, but like that's why I love riding. It's because it really helps with anxiety and stress.
Yeah.
Or whatever that outlet is, right? I used to play basketball back in the day, and I've got back. There's a court like across the street in a park, and I've got back into like going over there every now and then and like just shooting baskets for a while. But so that's good. And it's basketball, so a lot of it's kind of like golf. You get a good shot. I'm nowhere near like a Steph Curry where he just shoots the ball and doesn't even watch and just turns around and starts running because he knows.
It's crazy.
I'm like halfway surprised that it ever goes in. So.
No, I like it. I like it. Did we miss anything that you wanted to bring up?
I mean, there's always stuff to talk about. It's always just fun to talk to other coaches and get their input. So I appreciate the opportunity.
I appreciate you coming on, man. Yeah, this is really good. I'm trying to get more coaches, and it's always, I didn't have like a good list of questions, like good topics. And I feel like these are, while I say basic, they're so overarching. They hit so many different aspects of training, and everyone kind of does it a little bit differently. And so yeah, hopefully get some more coaches on and keep getting some ripper athletes. And well, I appreciate you taking the time. This is really good. And thank you, everybody. I'll put your website in the show notes. Hit up Adam, check out what they're doing. And any closing thoughts?
Man, just keep watching our Americans over in Europe because they're good.
They're really good.
Yeah.
And cut.